This episode is brought to you in part by the Apologetics Guy Show, the podcast that helps you find clear answers to tough questions about Christianity. Learn to explain your faith with courage and compassion. Join Moody Bible Institute professor Dr. Mikel Del Rosario at apologeticsguy.com.
Hey friends, this is a short bonus episode and it likely won't make sense unless you listen to the previous one about William F. Buckley Jr. It's a short episode, but I didn't think I could fit all this stuff in the last episode, and I really wanted to share it with you. So here we go. You're listening to the show that uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church. We press pause on the culture wars in order to explore how we got here and how we can do better. I'm Chris Staron, and this is Truce. One of the legacies of William F. Buckley Jr.'s career that I didn't cover last time was the Republican nomination of Barry Goldwater in 1964. Here again is Carl Bogus, author of Buckley, William F. Buckley Jr. and the Rise of American Conservatism.
Goldwater became a national figure through his book, The Conscience of the Conservative.
Published in 1960, just 4 years before he ran for president.
And that book was ghostwritten by Brent Bozell.
Do you remember that name? Bozell was Buckley's debating partner in college, and was, by then, his brother-in-law and a writer for National Review. The book was commissioned by a group of wealthy backers who wanted Goldwater to run, and one of those backers would go on to become a member of the John Birch Society's council. In fact, the manuscript of the book was completed at a Bircher meeting.
Brent Bozell is in significant part responsible for thrusting Goldwater, who of course was a senator from Arizona and was not an unknown figure, but he wasn't a particularly respected figure until he produced this manifesto.
National Review and Goldwater had a common hatred for communism and containment. Goldwater went so far as to call it treason.
Buckley certainly liked Goldwater in many ways, but I think that Buckley wasn't convinced that Goldwater was the sharpest knife in the drawer. But he certainly enjoyed a certain relationship with Goldwater. And one of the things they collaborated on, maybe the principal thing they collaborated on, was trying to excommunicate, I think effectively, excommunicating the John Birch Society from the conservative movement.
These guys, Goldwater and Buckley, had to do a weird dance. They knew that the John Birch Society was driven by kooky conspiracy theories that would derail the legitimacy of their movement. Yet, they couldn't help but court them as voters and subscribers. As you'll remember, Goldwater was the guy who gave a speech at the RNC saying that extremism in the name of liberty was no vice. In the same convention where they failed to pass a resolution denouncing by name the KKK and the Birchers. He was courting them, aware that these were not credible groups of people. So they tried to work out a way to court the voters and denounce the kookiness. Don't attack the society, attack Robert Welch, the founder of JBS. They did this in an article calling Welch the kiss of death for conservatism, and asking him to step down. Then, in the next issue, Goldwater wrote a letter to the editor stating that he didn't think that Welch's beliefs reflected those of the John Birch Society members. Side note, they did. But that really was beside the point, because this was about politics. And did it work? Did he shut down the Birchers? No, actually, they grew. Its distribution list was wider than that of the National Review. That's how strong this movement was. After trying to court members of the JBS, he turned a corner and attacked the organization itself. In article after article, Buckley, National Review, and later Barry Goldwater took shots at the John Birch Society. In one series, going point by point to discredit their claims, like this super dubious one.
Robert Welch didn't actually say Eisenhower was a communist.
The article then pointed to direct quotations in Welch's book, The Politician, where, yeah, he called Ike a communist. After many denunciations, they managed to wound the John Birch Society. Though I've seen conflicting reports of just how much impact they had. It continued to stick around, showing its head in places like the 1977 National Women's Conference. And it's still with us today. Buckley's work against the JBS and all this effort spent on attacking fringe groups makes sense. One of his defining life goals was to make conservatism respectable. Keep the ideology pure. That means fighting kooks. Here's the thing, though. He and Goldwater pushed conservatism further to the right, which made them and the GOP more open to extremists. It's really no surprise that the Birchers came knocking. By giving these guys oxygen, they made kookiness more respectable. Until it got out of control, like a dinosaur in a theme park. Note to self: write a paperback book about genetically modified dinosaurs going nuts on an island. Speaking of something that pushed conservatism, we need to talk one more time about Ayn Rand. You may remember her as the author of the blockbuster books Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. These giant novels, poorly written, ranty, and steamy, but strangely popular and hugely influential. She was a fan of Nietzsche's Superman that we spoke about last season. Rand, like Buckley, was a libertarian. But as we know, libertarians come in different forms. In her book, she preaches that essentially greed is good, charity is weakness and perhaps evil. The government should be small and get revenue not by taxation, but through voluntary giving and lotteries. The thing that put her at odds with Buckley is that she was an ardent, vocal atheist. This time, though, when Buckley and the National Review opposed a movement that they didn't like, and National Review continues to oppose her in print to this day, they didn't have any real effect. The books were too beloved, and because nothing in real life works in a straight line, even though she was a nemesis, according to Carl Bogus, she ended up building Buckley's movement. He wrote,
"Through these two books, Rand may be responsible for recruiting more people into the broad conservative movement than anyone else."
As uncomfortable as she made Buckley and National Review, she too shaped conservatism and the culture at large in the US. In 1991, the Library of Congress released a survey asking which books were most influential in American lives. Most influential in their lives. The Bible was number 1. Atlas Shrugged was number 2. The Journal wasn't the only place he tangled with Rand. Buckley started the group Young Americans for Freedom in 1960. It started with just 100 students and rallied around what is known as the Sharon Statement. Here are some highlights.
Foremost among the transcendent values is the individual's use of his God-given free will, whence derives his right to be free from the restrictions of arbitrary force.
We'll skip down a bit.
The purpose of government is to protect those freedoms through the preservation of internal order, the provision of national defense, and the administration of justice. That when government ventures beyond these rightful functions, it accumulates power, which tends to diminish order and liberty.
What did you pick up there? They mentioned God, there was the push for small government, and it's basically a religious libertarian statement, right? Well, this was Buckley's way of reaching out to young people with conservative messages. And maybe that sounds like small potatoes, but Buckley was a beacon for young conservatives. They dressed like him, copied his stubbornness. He wasn't just a leader, but a blueprint of what you could become when you grew up. At their first rally at the Manhattan Center, 3,000 young conservatives showed up with another 3,000 turned away at the door. One of their first crusades to try to get the name of the Peace Corps changed to the Anti-Communist Freedom Corps, and to screen all volunteers to make sure they were sufficiently anti-communist. Buckley, if you'll remember, was defined by both his religion and his opposition to communism. Now there were thousands of young people just like him. But Buckley hit some roadblocks. He wasn't the only voice out there. Some members of the YAF were Birchers, and several followed Rand's philosophy, objectivism. YAF's first national chairman was devoted to her. This was a real threat. Not only were conspiracy theorists infiltrating the movement, but Rand was pushing atheism as well. Something Buckley would have none of. Then there was the selfishness that she advocated for. No, seriously, she literally published a collection of writings titled The Virtues of Selfishness. The group had yet another threat. Anarcho-capitalist Murray Rothbard, the libertarian who thought that governments should be abolished completely. Remember him? I summarized his ideas that if you were out in the desert dying of thirst and came across an oasis, you would respect the property owner so much that you'd be willing to die to protect his property rights. That guy. At a YAF meeting in 1969 in St. Louis, a group of anarchists marched in hopes of taking the group over or splitting it. Rothbard himself even wrote a statement in support.
This letter is a plea that you use the occasion of the public forum of the YAF convention to go, to split, to leave the conservative movement where it belongs. Leave the house to your false friends, for they are your enemies.
He went on to declare that the conservative movement, a la Buckley, was run by ex-communists and royalists. Those were fighting words. Buckley managed to fight him off, and some of Rothbard's followers were forced out after demanding that YAF denounce the war in Vietnam and endorse legalized marijuana. Things that conservatives were just not cool with. Those of you who listened to my season on fundamentalism may remember that the further we get into extremes, the more likely we are to split and split and split again. To refine our movement until it's exactly like us and to demonize everyone else. Rand was a libertarian. So was Rothbard, and so was Buckley. But they were all on the extremes of that ideology. So any variation at all made them enemies. To the point where both Rothbard and Rand threatened to upend Buckley's youth movement. Buckley didn't always win every battle he fought, but he was consistent, right? If something offended his vision of what conservatism should be, he attacked it. He wanted to make conservatism a respectable position to hold, which meant that conspiracy theories, cranky atheists like Ayn Rand, and the kookiness of Birchers had to be denounced. In his idea, free markets must be coupled with religion. Anything that got in the way of that was denounced. The conservative movement was inching towards extremism, picking its way through a minefield of fringe ideas. But conservatism had all kinds of tentacles. Fear of communism led some, like Ronald Reagan, to worry that the Soviets had superior weapons. They didn't. Or the John Birch Society to think that the American government was full of spies. It really wasn't. Ayn Rand played it up to convince people that greed and selfishness are good. By the way, since this is a Christian podcast, that is about as antithetical to the teachings of Jesus as you can get. Greed is not good. It's tempting to see conservatism in this era as one thing. It really wasn't. It was all of these movements and more. Weird blends where people followed both Buckley and Rand, or Buckley and the John Birch Society, despite huge gaps in their ideologies. We're tracking something that is nebulous and has lots of exceptions. William F. Buckley helped to make conservatism respectable in intellectual circles. But despite his best efforts, he couldn't control it. Couldn't keep the ideologies from splintering and splintering and splintering again. Special thanks to Carl T. Bogus. His book is Buckley, William F. Buckley Jr. and the Rise of American Conservatism. As always, a complete list of sources is in your show notes and on the website, along with discussion questions if you want to go over this with your friends and family. If you'd like to help out the podcast, there are a few things you can do. One of them is to hit the subscribe button in your podcasting app. That means you'll get every new episode as it's released, and it really helps my numbers be more consistent. Please also consider telling a friend that you love the Truce podcast. Send him a text, post it on social media, and it's greatly appreciated. You can also leave a comment and 5 stars on your podcasting app. That really helps people find the show. Truce is listener supported. Really. It's a one-man operation done on a tight budget. If you like what you're hearing and you want to hear more, give a little each month at trucepodcast.com/donate. Special thanks to the people who lent me their voices for this episode, including Bob Stevenson, Chris Sloan, and Josh Griffith. Since we had this bonus episode, which is something we usually don't do, God willing, we'll talk again in 2 weeks. Truce is a production of Truce Media, LLC. I'm Chris Starrin, and this is Truce.